Hi, I'm Ron. Thanks for being here. I hope you have your Native American or Native American style flute handy. As always, I am working on a medium A today, this one by Colin Peterson at Woodland Voices. All right, what we're going to be talking about this time around is what happens when you get to the top of basic scale. And you want to keep on going, right? How high can you go, and how do you get there? Now, I think this is really worth a deep dive because I think there's a lot of confusion about what we're going to be calling the upper register of the Native American style flute. And so this is going to be a two-part video because we can talk about breath, we can talk about fingers, we can talk about other things, but maybe most importantly, what we can talk about is mindset. All right, what happens when you get up there, and what are some of the expectations that we bring along that maybe don't really have anything to do with the instrument that we are playing? Right now, I always do these videos with just straight up raw flute sound. I don't process the sound at all, right? So what you hear, what I'm playing is what you're getting, right? No filters or EQs or verb or anything like that, all right? Grab your flute. If you've been playing for a while, you probably have already experimented a bit up there. Bring all that experience with you. If you're just starting out, don't have to feel intimidated. It's not all that difficult, and we'll get you going exploring a really fascinating area of our Native American style flutes. Okay, for the purposes of our videos here together, we're going to say that the upper register of the Native American flute starts with the top note of basic scale. Now, for those of you who are musicians, of course, the top note of basic scale is just an octave repetition of the bottom note of basic scale. If you're not a musician or you haven't had Euroclassical training or something like that, don't worry about the jargon. All that means is that the top note of basic scale is vibrating twice as fast as the bottom note of basic scale. Now, it's a good place to start because we can tune into our breath right away. On most of our flutes, as you go up basic scale, it actually helps to put a little more air through the flute. It will help the notes to speak just a little bit better. So that when you get to the top note of basic scale, you're going to be working a little more around the diaphragm than you are on the bottom note of basic scale. But it's also where some of the confusion begins, I think. Because depending on the flute maker you're dealing with or the fingering chart that you're looking at, I've seen a lot of different fingerings recommended to produce the top note of basic scale, starting with this, everything covered, right? This is all about the breath. Notice my fingers are not moving. It's just about how much breath you put through the flute and how you put it there, right? And what that does is if you do it the right way, then all the air inside starts vibrating twice as fast or, somewhere thereabouts, and you get the top note of basic scale. But I've also seen this recommended. This is probably the most commonly recommended fingering for 6-hole flutes. But I've seen this a fair amount. I've seen this. This actually works on a fair number of flutes. So that's a lot of possibilities to produce what we are describing as one note, right? But that's a little bit of a problem, yeah? So let's talk about that a little bit more, and what I want to explore first is how we're describing the tuning of our flute. Tuning in general is a really interesting subject, and if you want some more thinking about that, especially as it applies to our native flutes, you can check out my video about it. There's a link in the description box. There'll also be a screen link towards the end of this video. Now, when I say that my flute is a medium A flute, that immediately clues you in that this is kind of a contemporary hybrid style flute. A is not a musical term for us traditionally, right? It's borrowed from the Euro-classical tradition because nowadays a lot of us end up playing with guitar players or orchestras or what have you, and it just makes it a little bit easier for everybody to get along. But traditionally, our flutes were not tuned that way, right? We have this notion, because of our machines and our software always defaulting to it, that A440, A being tuned to 440 cycles per second, is some kind of universal standard, as though Johann Bach went up a mountain in Germany someplace and was handed a stone tablet that said, "Thou shalt always tune A to 440." Except that the musicologists tell us that Bach didn't tune his instruments to A440. Right, so a couple of little stories from my own experience that might help us get to a place I want us to be before we get into upper register stuff on our native flute. Way back in a previous millennium, when I was a music student, I got a chance to spend a month in Vienna. Now, Vienna is such a city of musicians that at the time, I don't know if this is still true, but at the time you could actually call a city information hotline on your phone and they would give you a tuning pitch, right? Just in case you didn't have your tuning fork or your electric tuner or whatever you needed, you could call city information and they'd give you a tuning pitch, concert A. Now, we were all music students from the States, so we were accustomed, we had been drilled A440, A440. But in Vienna, at least at that time, A was not 440. It was a little lower than that. It was like 434, 435, somewhere in there. Right? So this notion that somehow A is always a particular place is a fiction even in Euro-classical music. Now, another time I was in a recording studio with a good buddy of mine, Ash Dargan, who's a Larrakia, Aboriginal Australian, and he was laying down some really, really beautiful vocal tracks for an album we were working on together. I'll put a link to the album in the description box so you can hear it if you want. But when he finished laying down some of the vocal tracks, the well-meaning engineer said, "Hey, Ash, if you want, I could slap some auto-tuner on that." You know, the implication being that, wow, that was really out of tune, Ash. And I loved Ash's response. Do not touch the auto-tuner. I'm singing exactly what I intend to sing. Now, how is this relevant to what we're talking about today? Our instruments ideally are handmade. This flute certainly was handmade very beautifully, right? All natural materials, just wood and leather here. Yeah, I guess there's a little bit of artificial sinew in here. But the business parts of things are all about the wood, so they're very responsive to temperature and humidity, in other words. No moving parts. Why should we expect our Native American flutes that are coming from a completely different tradition and are made a completely different way? They are not manufactured the way a silver flute is. Why should we expect our flutes to conform to a Euro-classical tuning system? And nowhere do we need to let go of that expectation more than when we get into the upper register. So let's start with our top note of basic scale, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. In the end, music is all about the ears. And so, of course, we want to be able to hear the things that I'm talking about today. But, you know, also seeing is believing, and sometimes visual aids can be helpful. So what I'm going to do is boot up a tuning app on my phone. This is from Cleartune. The last time I checked, it's a free download at the Apple App Store. I like it. It defaults to Euro-classical tuning system, of course, A440 equal temperament, but it allows you possibilities of exploring other tuning systems as well. We're going to leave it on the default setting today. It's fine for what we're talking about. Now, you see the wheel, and you see letter names on the wheel. Those, of course, are from the Euro-classical tuning system. Those are pitches you can aim at if that's what you're trying to do. Just above the wheel in a little box, you'll see the actual frequency that's sounding at any time. All right, now, my flute is tuned to A, and the fundamental of this flute is somewhere around A440. And what I'm going to do is play, and I'd like for you to watch the wheel, and I'm going to use my breath to pull the pitch up above A and down below A. So you're going to see the wheel move back and forth a little bit, and I'm doing that with my breath. You can find ways to do it with your fingers as well, but I'm going to do it with my breath today. And then I'm going to try to kind of settle in right on that A and see how close to 440 I can get. All right, here we go. Okay, the big takeaway, I think, from the little demo is how much you can affect the frequency that the flute is actually speaking just by using your breath. I was able to move that wheel quite a bit on either side of the target pitch A just by how I was using my breath. So that works on any fingering on the flute. Our flutes, by their nature, are very sensitive to the air we're putting through them. So, when I hear a player complaining that their flute isn't in tune, I always have to ask myself, brother, you sure it's the flute? Maybe you're just not listening and using your breath in an appropriate way. The flute's actually very flexible. So are you. A lot of time that is our actual problem, is that we're less flexible than the instrument that we're playing. All right, what we're going to do next is I'm going to set up a split screen, and on one side you'll see the tuning wheel again, and on the other side you'll see fingering charts that are showing you what fingering I'm using to produce the top note of basic scale. All right, again you'll see the wheel moving back and forth, right? The little box above the wheel, instead of showing numbers around 440 or thereabouts, are going to be showing numbers closer to 880 or thereabouts, because the top note of basic scale, of course, vibrates twice as fast as the bottom note of basic scale. So our target frequency here is 880. All right, and what I'd like for you to pay special attention to and see if you can start hearing the differences. I'm going to try to use my breath the same way on every fingering, right? And watch that wheel, watch those numbers, keep your ears open, see and hear what happens. Now, according to the fingering charts and according to Euroclassical music notation, all of those fingerings produced the same pitch. But as you could clearly hear and as you could see on the tuning wheel, each of those fingerings actually produced a slightly different pitch. Now, I have a number of other flutes in A here in the studio, and I can guarantee you that if I picked up any of them, even other flutes in A that were also made by Colin Peterson, and did the same experiment, that each of them would also produce different pitches for each of those fingerings, and they would probably be different pitches from what this flute produced with those fingerings. A reality of our flute playing and flute making tradition is that it is not the intent for all of the flutes to sound alike, or for all of them to behave the same way. So part of our job as flute players then is to become intimately acquainted with each of our flutes and understand how it behaves on each of those fingerings, how it responds to our breath, and so on and so forth. We should not expect all of our flutes to behave the same way. Now, here are a few tips for how you can adjust the frequency once you get up there on that top note of basic scale. There are some things you can do to help move that wheel one direction or the other if you choose to, right? I've already showed you a little bit about the breath, right? That generally speaking, the more air you're putting through the flute, the more the frequency is going to go up a little bit, right? So I'm not going to use the tuning wheel now. I want you to listen and hear what happens. I'm going to use this fingering, right? Because on this flute, it's closest to A880. And I'm just going to put more air through the flute, and I want you to hear the pitch go up. Now, you're also hearing that as the pitch goes up, the flute gets a little bit louder because I'm putting more air through. All the way through there, I'm just letting my tongue lay on the bottom of my mouth and stay out of the way of the airflow, right? But here's another trick that you can try. This time I'm going to gradually lift my tongue. What that's going to do is reduce the amount of space that the air has to get through, right? So same amount of air, but through a smaller space means the air has to speed up. And as the air speeds up, it should pull the pitch up just a little bit too, without making the flute sound a whole lot louder. It's more subtle, but it can be really, really useful if you want the flute not to yell at its full voice on that top note of basic scale. It can maybe help you match another instrument the way you want to without getting too loud about it. Right? Now, here's also some things that you can do with fingers. If you want to pull the pitch up, right, you're using this fingering, and you feel like you want to pull the pitch up again without really increasing the airflow at all, you can try just slightly venting the hole a little bit. Now, I usually like to rock this way. Some people like to rock this way. Doesn't really matter, whatever way works for you. What matters is you're just slightly venting that hole, and it will pull the pitch up. Listen. Right, that's fairly noticeable, and it's just a very, very small move. A very easy way to pull the pitch down, if you need to, is I'm using this fingering for top note of basic scale. I'm going to just slightly cover the bottom hole, and listen to how it pulls the pitch down as I do that. Right now, in the moment, you can use any of these, you can use combinations of them, and once you get comfortable enough with how your flute responds with all of these different little techniques, then just open up your ears and hear where you want the pitch to be, and trust that your body will respond and help the pitch get there. I find that one of the most effective ways of getting the pitch that I want is to be able to imagine that pitch first, and then I have some sense of what I'm after. Or if I'm playing with other musicians, keep my ears wide open to how they're using pitch and how do I want to interact with that. It doesn't necessarily mean that I always want to hit exactly the same pitch they are. Sometimes the real passion, the real expressive power of something is not matching each other exactly, just kind of setting up that little bit of tension of the pitches not quite being exactly in the same place is very, very expressive. I mean, listen to any blues musician and you'll hear that all the time. All right, so I think that's a good place to stop for today. What we're going to do in the second part of this series is go on up above the top note of basic scale. How high can we go, and what do we have to do to get there? All right, if you found this video helpful, please hit that like and subscribe buttons. Check out some of the links to my other videos in the description box below. Please leave comments or questions, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Or you can go to my website and use the contact form there. The website is ronwarrenmusic.com, and there's a link in the description box below. Thanks for hanging out. Hope you had a good time, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Keep breathing. Keep listening. Learn each of your flutes.